Listen, next to the stage, I want to bring up a colleague whose brilliance and whose mind is only exceeded by her generous heart. She's a thinker, she's an actor, she's a planner, she's an activator, and she's been a tremendous colleague and partner in this work. She received her PhD in physiology from the University of Wisconsin-Madison School of Medicine and public public policy. And we've been fortunate enough to have her on our team for over a decade now as my vice president. For Nehemiah's vice president of education and research. She's going to talk about the power of community transformation theory. Please help me welcome my colleague, Dr. Karen Reece.
Hello. This is really exciting to be here today. We've been planning this for a while, and while 10 years seems to go fast in time, looking back in preparation for today, it's absolutely amazing how much work has been done, not only by Nehemiah, but by our whole community. And for you type A's in the room, don't worry about the schedule. We built in plenty of space, so it'll be okay. All right, let's get over here. Okay, so just a little bit of a roadmap for what I'll talk about today. I'll give a quick review of what was written in our Madison plan, some of the commitments and the general aims, just to refresh your memory. If you haven't had a chance to read the Our Madison plan, it is on Nehemiah's website, nehemiah.org. There's access to that in your booklets, in your agenda for today. I'll then talk a little bit about the methods that we used to come up with this theory and a little bit about the root cause that we looked at. And then I'll break down our theory of community transformation and some of the outcomes and great things that have happened over the last decade. So in the beginning, after the article came out, after the town hall meeting that 700 people showed up to, a coalition of 6 Black leaders in Madison came together to talk about, okay, now what do we do? And over the course of a year, they held listening sessions with over 3,400 people. There were Black people in those spaces, but then another 360 specific listening sessions with Black community members to talk about what do we do now, what do we do differently. And this included 40 Black-led organizations. Yes, there are that many in Madison. The idea was to create a leadership team to look at solutions, establish a plan of action, and partner with other leaders in and outside of the Black community. Our Madison plan laid out some very detailed aims that, and also described a very conservative budget to make that plan happen within 2 years, or to get it started in 2 years. And that conservative estimate was about $1.6 million, which was kind of on the low end. We didn't receive half of that funding, but we got started, we got to work, and we did what we could, as we always do. There were 5 focus areas identified in the Our Madison plan that you heard mentioned already. We learned pretty quickly that leadership and capacity development should actually be kind of an underlying foundation to all of the work that was happening. 46 Black community members participated in work groups that convened around these focus areas. And sadly, I want to note specifically that almost a quarter of that 46 people have left Madison, relocated for other opportunities. So we got to do better than that because we lost a lot of great minds. This is part of what's commonly known as the Black brain drain that we have here. Couple of commitments. Justified anger is and always will remain Black-led. First and foremost, this has to stay the same. Justified anger is collaborative and community-led, and there will be focus areas that will be built on, plans will be built on existing successful community efforts. So one of the things that the creators of this plan said at the start is we don't want to duplicate efforts. So many times we come into a space with a great idea and we just dig in and get started without looking around to see who's already tried this. Is it still working? And if not, why? And those are really important questions to ask. So the charge in the R. Madison Plan was to create a movement to unite leadership, vision, and strategy. The three key pieces to look at are policy, practices, and people. So what are the written rules of the game that we can point to and we know? How are we actually carrying out those things? How are we doing business in our day-to-day? And then what are the people doing? And how do we not only give them information, but speak to their hearts and their attitudes and their minds? The purpose of justified anger was not to solve Madison's stark racial disparities on its own, but was meant to convene and to catalyze and to support other programs that were currently existing. So one of the biggest things when people really approach this hard work is the misconception that progress is linear. So we get this idea, there's a plan, there's a clear path forward, and all we have to do is follow the steps and we'll reach our goal. That is absolutely not true. And what it usually leads to is frustration and people sort of give up and quit, right? Or they switch horses too early and try something different because it's not going fast enough. We hear this very, very often. What it really looks like is that bottom graph, and that bottom image is a little bit clean for how this really goes. But it's back and forth, there's ups and downs, there's stops and starts, and you really just have to stay the course. So here's just a couple of things when you're looking at major complex issues. I wanted to point out some things that you should watch out for. So the first thing here is looking at transactional versus translational approaches. Most of the way we do business in this country really is following a transactional approach. So these are looking at issue-based things, solutions that involve, going to get services or, providing information that has a very clear start and finish. And we assume, like that first graph, it's going to be linear. These are transactional approaches work great if it's a technical problem. So in other words, if it's something like the classic example, you have a stool and a leg breaks on the stool, it's pretty clear you got to go get certain tools, you got to get maybe some hardware, you put it back together, you stand it up and it works. Well, things like racism aren't exactly that simple. And at Nehemiah, we focus on transformative approaches. And so these are things, how do we build solutions across multiple institutions? How do we make sure that we're focusing on systems and structures and not only individuals and interpersonal things? And then how do we really shift cultural values and take collective action? Transformational approaches can also be called relational approaches. The historical trauma pervasive in our systems and structures require that to make an approach successful, we have to start with that relationship building. Relationship building leads to the establishment of trust between not only individuals, but also organizations, which then gives us the space to move forward and also the ability to speak a common language that helps us to be more efficient and effective in developing our solutions. And so these kinds of problems are called complex adaptive problems, which really just means like it sounds. There's a lot of pieces. When we try to change one piece, there's going to be something on the other side of the issue that will also shift and change that maybe we anticipated, but maybe we didn't. And so in finding that ultimate solution or reaching that ultimate goal, we have to make sure that we've got plans in place to touch all of those different pieces. Another thing to watch out for is how you lay out your plan or strategy. Many of you are probably familiar with the logic model framework. This works great if you have a program. So you're asking for things like, what am I doing? What do I need to get that done? And what do I hope it will accomplish? So straightforward, laying it out so it's clear. A lot of grant applications ask for this. But for complex problems like solving racism, the theory of change is really where you want to start. The theory of change is looking at the central processes or drivers through which change comes. And so it's looking at an issue holistically. It's looking at those complex layers that come into play. It's looking at the systems and structures that might be involved. And most importantly, the theory of change is asking you to think about the root cause of the issue so you can develop a theory for how you think it might work out. And the theory can be based either on formal research or it can be based on just our general understanding, our lived experience, and our work efforts for how we understand an issue. And so now I'm going to show you the basis for our theory of community transformation and how it's organized. So to start off, let's look at the social determinants of health. Who's heard of social determinants of health? Awesome. So these are things when people usually talk about health and healthcare. We think about going to the doctor. We think about we get a cold, we go get, see if we have an infection, get some medicine. But our general health is more than just masking. It's more than just hand sanitizer. It really is determined by all of the things and places we go and things that we do, things that we encounter in places that we live, where we work, and how we socialize. And so the things you see on the screen are the general areas that are considered when we look at holistic health for individuals and also looking at public health. What are the things we need to address? One of the underrepresented areas of this is the social and community context area. So it's easy for us to think about systems like education. How do we change curriculum? How do we build more schools? How do we change school lunch? It's a little easier, but underrepresented too, to think about our neighborhoods and our built environment. Where's a food desert? Our environment's walkable. These are things that a lot of people are working on. But when we think about how do we exist in space together, how do we relate to one another, that's something that's a little bit more difficult to quantify. And so a lot of people kind of shy away from that. Two of the big things within that social and community context are a term called social cohesion and discrimination or racial equity. So the work that our Madison Plan outlines and the work that Justified Anger has been doing over the years is really focused on this social cohesion. So in other words, how do we all get together? Is everyone talking to each other in this room? Do we know each other? Are we safe? Do we feel safe in the same room? Do I feel like I can be myself in the spaces where I am? Or do I feel like I'm not really fitting in? And that's really important. Dr. G talked about this a little bit, but I just want to emphasize that there are very real effects of racism on health. This isn't just a theory. These are things that have been actually scientifically documented and reviewed. We have articles written about this. We have quantitative data that supports this. All of us can understand what it's like to be under chronic stress. So, most of us have experienced maybe a family member with a health issue. We are very stressed out at work. But those are things while over a period of time, we'll all maybe feel extra fatigue. Some of us might gain a few pounds or lose a few pounds. And eventually we can find a solution to that. Either we can switch jobs, we can cut back hours, hire more people. Hopefully our family members getting care or removed from that situation. But what if the source of your chronic stress was something that you cannot change? Something that is absolutely visible every time you are seen, a lot of times when you're heard speaking and you can't change it. And that's skin color. And that's real. And so the effects of racism on the body are really a result of that chronic stress, that toxic stress. And while this is a really dramatic image of the brain, you can see on the one side, the healthy brain, there's a lot of things lit up showing you all the activity in the brain. And on the other side, you can see much less color. And so there's a lot of changes for how it's activated. And this leads to all kinds of problems affecting every single system in our bodies, including mental health, psychiatric disorders, might result in higher BMI, cardiovascular disease, high blood pressure, diabetes, maternal and infant mortality. And so while we need specific solutions to help take care of those specific health issues, we need to take many steps back to figure out how we can stop that trend from happening in the first place. So there's a professor, Dr. William Smith at the University of Utah, who coined a phrase called racial battle fatigue. And so this theory comes from looking at a phenomenon that happens in our military combat. So when soldiers are stationed overseas, they're in a community that they're not familiar with. They don't know the customs and the cultures. Maybe they're in a place where they're absolutely not welcome. Their presence is not welcome. And so it was noticed that this would start to weigh on people if they're stationed for a long time overseas. And then also just general battle, combat is going to really wear someone down. And so Dr. Smith looked at this and said, hey, this is a lot like what I experience and other experiences in predominantly white institutions and spaces. Because I'm feeling, the effects of racism, I'm being treated differently and talked to differently by my white colleagues, and it's adding up. He really defines a set of conditions that emerge from this. So racial battle fatigue is really a framework to examine stress responses associated with African Americans in historically white spaces. There's extensive research around social cohesion in neighborhoods and the importance of both building community and individuals. But at a broader level, social cohesion, it's just not enough to only strengthen networks of African Americans, right? We have to work on every single person in the community. Because especially in a place like Madison, where we only have 6% of the population is Black, closer to 60 to 70% white, it's just the numbers aren't going to be there to create those spaces. So everyone's got to be on board, and particularly white people, we've got to be on board to change the way that we're acting and what we're aware of. And so we're taking in this, our Madison plan, an innovative approach and to really look at creating long-term change. So we have to work towards social cohesion, not only within communities, but between communities. And our approach is to focus on leadership and capacity development. A couple of the pieces that we look at here, and were kind of laid out in setting up the theory of community transformation, are simply, you can write it in a simple sentence, they're not simple problems to solve, but how do we reduce these stress-related conditions due to racial battle fatigue? How do we lower barriers to participation in social networks? And then how do we reduce incidents of microaggressions in cross-cultural interactions? As I mentioned, and just to emphasize, things like hypertension, high blood pressure is a symptom, but racial battle fatigue is the real killer. And that's why life expectancies for our Black community members are lower than others. And that's a huge problem that no one should be ignoring. So a simple view is to lay it out in 3 pieces. What we need to do is we need to align systems. So we need to look at the systems and structures, how they currently exist. As Dr. G said, we need to untangle the lines, and we need to kind of get a good start on that. But in doing that, we also need to bolster grassroots. We need to build leadership capacity within communities. This is important because a lot of solutions that we see in our society pick one or the other. We have people in institutions, whether they're government, nonprofit, healthcare, within their offices and the corporate boards. We have meetings, we have strategy planning sessions, and we come up with what we think are the problems, and then we come up with what we think are the solutions to those problems without ever asking the people who are existing in those spaces. So we can't possibly, if that's not our lived experience, if we're not currently in that moment, we can't possibly even get the problem right. We can say what we think it is based on observation, but if that's not our experience, we might not get it right. And if we don't have the problem right, we absolutely are not going to get the solutions right. And so when systems work without involving communities, lots of money and effort is put into place, and the initiatives may or may not work. And a lot of times when things are planned this way, if an initiative doesn't work, so one of the common things is saying, for this community meeting for, government, it's going to have a neighborhood meeting. Why aren't the people coming? Oh, well, obviously it's childcare. So if we just provide childcare, people will come. And so then you have the meeting, you pay for the childcare, still nobody comes. And so instead of thinking, why didn't that work? A lot of times we jump to the conclusion of saying, oh, I guess they just don't want to be here. So whatever, we'll move on. And so, looking at the pathway to progress not being linear, it's so important. When your idea doesn't work out the way you thought it would the first time, don't just scrap it and say it's not going to work. Figure out what you can do to make it better, or figure out what other direction you need to take. And so in doing this, we need to build up the leadership through grassroots, looking at neighborhoods, looking at individual leadership training, and using methods that are relevant, appropriate, and most importantly, context specific for community members. And it's important that community members themselves are designing those solutions. In the systems, we want to convene subject matter in the key focus areas, subject matter experts. These would include things like monthly meetings for professionals to get together, talk about issues centered on relationship building and shared decision making. So another place where we get it wrong is we don't leave time for that relationship building. And our funding structures don't allow that. Everyone knows that. It's difficult. You write a grant, you have 1 year to finish it. But relationships take how long they take to build. You can't put a clock on that. Some might be easy to form and you're connected within 2 months. Others might be 2 years. Others might be longer than that. It all depends on where we're starting, how far apart we are, and how much we have to do to get aligned. To get this work done, it's a lot of work, right? There are a lot of different pieces to move. And so community members who are unpaid and unsupported, and people who work in systems who that's their full-time job, that's still not enough to cover it. So how do we mobilize allies for these efforts? How do we train up volunteers broadly to come and contribute to these things? Increasing the awareness of white Madison to the root causes of racial justice based on our nation's history is one way to help this. And for white people in the community, another big trap that we fall in is, number one, thinking that we know the most efficient and effective way to do things. And number two, we're the best person to lead in the room. So, we'll see very often task forces, work groups, or boards that are attempting to be more diverse. Lots of recruitment happens. People go out, recruit people of color, people with other identities, but there's still someone from the dominant demographic at the head of the table. And so people come in with the diversity in demographics, which also brings the diversity in the way they're thinking about things and diversity of ideas, which very likely are completely different than what that person leading that effort thought it was going to be. And what happens is we think, oh, that's silly, that will never work. We dismiss the voices of the people in the room and they stop coming. And we say, oh, I guess they just didn't want to be here. They just didn't want to do the work. That's a problem. So how do we get in these spaces, white people, and say, I'm just going to write a check and support this effort because it costs money. I have some money I can give. Or I might have a PhD, but this organization needs someone to stuff envelopes to do their mailer. I'm going to do that. That's going to be fine. How do we find the places that people say are needed, and how do we fit in there in a humble way? So this is it. This is the theory. It's very simple. But don't worry, I'm going to walk you through it. And they did tell me that I could get nerdy today, so I am. So the thing to focus on this page here is on the left-hand side in the red, which is our overall ultimate goal. What we're looking to do is mitigate the negative health effects of racial battle fatigue by impacting social and community context. So taking the first part, looking at that leadership and capacity development, how do we build and strengthen social capital? What this means is pouring into individuals, getting them educated, changing hearts and minds so that they're ready to partner. There's 3 different ways that we've looked at that. And this is really preparing people for cross-cultural work. And as I've been kind of, focusing on, a lot of that is the, dominant culture, white people out here. to recognize, things that we maybe haven't ever thought of in our lives because we've never had to experience it, helping people to go into spaces and not cause additional harm, minimize the harm that exists, and figure out ways to not do worse, right? And then we also need leadership programs and creation of Black spaces so that we have safe spaces for Black community members, Black professionals to gather, to be authentic, to express themselves and not feel like they have to be stifled, like they have to. How many people in the room have been with a Black colleague or friend and make a comment about racism and they turn to you and say, oh, I didn't mean you. They shouldn't have to say that, right? We should just know that. It should just be accepted. And we need to be okay with that being a reality and having that motivate us to move for change. So we looked at, again, just like those three circles, building up grassroots leadership in Black communities and Black neighborhoods through coaching and mentoring, a little bit of education and training, and finding support for the people that are existing in our neighborhoods that really are already doing all of this work. Usually unrecognized, usually unfunded. But if you go into that neighborhood and you say, where can I find out about how this works around here? Someone's gonna tell you a name, and that's gonna be that person that everyone knows that gets it done. Also looking at our Leadership Institute. So we have Justified Anger Leadership Institute that builds up Black professionals, focuses not only on leadership, but really, again, strengthening that social network and providing support in a place like Madison where it can be difficult to find a space to exist, to socialize, to work that's comfortable. And then in the middle there, we have our Ally Development Pathway, which is preparing people who aren't Black to do this work and to make change and to eventually engage in cultural, cross-cultural engagement. So a couple examples of how we've done this is Black History for a New Day. You've heard a ton about that. This is, let me just see how many people have taken it here. Oh, almost everybody, that's great. If you don't have your hand up, you can still take it. It's a really great class. I know I have to say that, but I've also sat through it 15 times and I have not gotten bored yet. So I learn something new every time. It's a 9-week course. It goes from the pre-Atlantic slave trade in Africa, so what happened before slavery, we don't often talk about that, and takes us all the way up through civil rights. We've moved about 5,500 people through that, people in 13 Wisconsin counties and 19 US states. And this is one of the good things that happened from COVID, because it forced us to take our training online and make it accessible to anybody anywhere. We're also working to develop what we're calling Justified Anger courses, which is taking our online platform and filling it up with content that you can either complete on your own at your own pace or to engage with in small group sessions. So you'll hear more about that later. The other really cool thing is that over 60 organizations have actually sent full groups of their employees to the class. Most of this 5,500 comes from word of mouth. We did very minimal advertising over the first several years of this program. We'd have someone come from an organization on their own and think, wow, I really need this, and bring their companies along. And then individuals from over 200 organizations have attended. So, that's, one of the great ways that we create the awareness necessary to make change. Oh, and then, of course, the director is Siobhan Jackson. Is she in the room or doing? Oh, she's up there running the show. So definitely watch for more information from her as we go. Next, our Justified Anger Leadership Institute. And so this has moved through 86 participants, I want to say 8 cohorts, and representing approximately, I just did a quick count, so this may not be entirely accurate, but it's close, 36 organizations or small businesses where Black people are working in Madison and Dane County, and also some entrepreneurs that have come into play. And so this is 6 monthly sessions that people come together for. It keeps the cohorts are smaller, like 8 to 12 people, so it's very easy to be relational and individualized. It's over 25 hours of in-class learning and one-on-one training and mentoring. And it's a place where the teaching is done by prominent Black professionals, not only to give that information, but again, to build those social networks and that support. And this is run by who you saw first, Alexandra G. Lewis. Is she still in the room? You saw her and clapped for her again. She does amazing work. And then, of course, our grassroots leadership component, which is the main piece of that is exploring principles of leadership, which is approximately a week or 2 weeks long curriculum that is with people in neighborhoods that sign up. It doesn't have to be like a specific neighborhood. It can be anyone from the community that participates. This is both group and individual coaching. So classroom is one thing, but like learning while things are happening is really important. And a lot of times in our neighborhoods, we don't really have the time to sit down and take a class because we're dealing with different crises. And so how do we do that in action? We've moved 66 people through that, and it represents neighborhood leaders and social entrepreneurs. Is Jackie Hunt here today? Oh, come on, don't bend over. There she is way back in the yellow. And one of the great things I want to say about this particular work, we got this theory of community transformation was put together and kind of in preparation for the grant that you saw featured from Wisconsin Partnership Program, which was $1 million grant over 5 years. And it involved these 3 components to build these up and operate them. This was one of the aims, grassroots leadership development, that was severely disrupted during COVID. So again, neighborhoods already dealing with limited resources and lots of things going on. Suddenly we have people who are either losing their jobs or hours or forced to go to work extra hours in maybe dangerous situations. We have kids home from school. I mean, there were a lot of things going on. Well, organizations and institutions had their corporate structures to worry about. So the first couple months of COVID involved them, getting on Zoom meetings and figure out how do we redo our RFP process? How do we figure this out? Meanwhile, people like Miss Jackie and others on the ground just said, okay, let's do what we do. It's kind of like in Dr. G's closing poem. We already know how to do this. We've been in this before, we've been here with less, so let's put it together and make it happen. And so within that first month, we, along with 13 other Black-led organizations in the community, we got like maybe a $35,000 grant, but everyone got together and just did the work, went and bought groceries, went and bought gift cards, brought kids lunches, things like that, and made it happen. And so while it didn't look like we thought it would and proposed it, it still happened, right? And so that's one of those other things that we have to be mindful of when you apply for a grant and you lay out a specific scenario. First of all, how are you talking to that funder about what you're doing so that they understand that you think this is going to work, but you don't know yet because you haven't tried it? How many of us, the idea the first time we do it, it works? Right? Like never. So why do we think that should work in our laws, in our practices, in our policies? And so it's also imperative on those of us who work with grant funding and contracts to make sure that we're telling the truth about how these projects are working or not working. It serves absolutely no one for you to take what you propose in your grant application and figure out how you make the data work for you. So, maybe you're cherry picking, but maybe also you're saying, we excluded these people because they didn't fit the criteria. I'm not going to include that in my data analysis. That's not fair. That's not giving the whole picture. So maybe it works to include people, but why are these people excluded? Why didn't it work? And what did I do to figure out how to do it differently? Sometimes that means you give up funding sources. That's what it has to be. And eventually in the funding community is really catching on. And I see Angela Davis here, Madison Community Foundation, sorry. Give it up for them because they really work with the organizations and sit with you when you're looking for funding and really want to work with people to make sure that all the dollars are spent well. So moving on to kind of the middle part of this diagram that I showed you is building and developing partnership capital. So once we've sort of trained people, given them the information to make social connections, to be ready for those social connections. Now we have to equip them with the tools to make those connections. Not everyone is just naturally gifted at meeting new people, extroverts, introverts, and all that sort of thing. So not only how do we prepare people to do that, but how do we give people the confidence, and then how do we make introductions? How do we connect people with our networks so that these partnerships can happen? We have another big problem in Madison. Some of it's been instigated by funding structures in both government and philanthropy, but where we're all kind of fighting over the same pot of money, and it's very difficult to actually collaborate because the structures just don't really allow for it. That's very detrimental. And then we also feel like because we're fighting over it, if it's your idea, you carved out that space, I'm here, this is my lane. If you want to get in it, you need to come to my lane. And if you do something like what I'm doing, I'm not going to support you. Or seeing that I'm doing something you wanted to do and being like, oh, I have a better way to do that, so I'm going to start up my completely own separate process. That's inefficient. So how do we do better to work together? Most Black-led organizations like Nehemiah are already operating beyond capacity, underfunded, understaffed for all this work that needs to get done. And so to really build capacity in communities, it's this partnership capital that's absolutely critical to make it work. And so the true partnerships with this education and training are what allows volunteers to see the vision to come on board, which allows organizations to see the vision and want to put resources into it. And then true partnership built on relationship is then something that will really lead to positive outcomes. And so we're really just giving people the confidence to make change within their own spheres of influence. Given our demographics, most white people, we encourage you always to get involved into cross-cultural spaces where you can learn more, interact more, and make friends. But the reality is, in a lot of your work days, you might not have the luxury of doing that, and it's not Black people's job to teach you how to solve this problem. You can still follow Black leadership without taking your direction directly from a Black person, right? And so how do you attend events like this, listen to Dr. G, watch YouTube videos, listen to other people in the room, read what they've written, and that's how you follow Black leadership and continuously come back and check to make sure you're still on the right path. Just a couple brief examples of ways we've done this. So the Court Observers Program is something that came out of the history class, and we realized, with the thousands of people that was emailing Dr. G, we realized that we just couldn't meet all these volunteers. We didn't have the time to even train a volunteer to tell them what to do. Very common in small organizations. What we did is encourage people that attended the classes, if there's something that you want to do and work on, let us know, and then you lead it. And so we got groups of volunteers together, encouraged someone to self-nominate as the point person for that, and then we would have a staff liaison there to help with resources if necessary to get the work done. And Court Observers is one of the biggest examples of that. They've observed over 6,000 hearings in Dane County. They're involved in both criminal and eviction court. Sandy Renardi leads that charge, along with in eviction court, Laura Berger and Lorna Aronson. And they've also built partnership capital by meeting with different people especially in the eviction space, Tenant Resource Center, Legal Action Wisconsin. And in the criminal space, they've convened the judges, the commissioners, and bailiffs and people that work in the jail to have these sit down and have a conversation. Here are things that we see that need to be changed, and here's how we're going to do it. The other example is a group that we've worked with in some of our training and consulting, I'll mention later, Beth Israel Center. And we spent several years with them working on this education and training, and they wanted to build a relationship with a Black-led organization. And so they reached out to Expo. We have Jerome Dillard here from Expo Wisconsin, who is working with people who have experienced incarceration. And so they're helping out with some of the housing programs that they have, and also hosting educational events in their spaces. Let me see. Oh, good. Okay. All right. Okay, so one of the pieces that I didn't show you originally on the first slide is you'll notice the new piece on the left-hand side that says organizational capital. And so it's critical to have the individuals and community members, but like I said, we need the organizations and the systems. And this is the piece where our Madison plan really outlines what should happen in these focus areas. Today in your breakout sessions, you're going to hear from other nonprofit and other initiative leaders from Madison who have done amazing work in each of these 4 focus areas. And remember, I said leadership and capacity development is integrated into all of them. So you'll have time to hear about that. So definitely enjoy that. But this is really about linking organizational capital is about convening and planning. It's about making resources tangible and allowing access to knowledge, people, and power. So we can't do this with people moving independently because that also happens, right? People and individuals come up with great ideas and then they get ready to do the ideas, they can't get resourced, or they hit a brick wall when the systems won't allow that change. So we've got to be moving these pieces in parallel. As I mentioned, we do cross-cultural leadership development. And so this is where Harry Hawkins and I come in and sit down with organizations. Some groups have 10 members, some groups will have hundreds of members. And we do very deep training. It's a very flexible framework where we do some of that, history training that's industry specific, but we also leave it open so that when we hit these roadblocks, when we hit the uncomfortable conversations, we have plenty of space to unpack that. One of the really difficult things about doing race equity training, anti-racism training within an organizational structure is most employees are used to doing workplace training. It's something that this is only something I do here. It's only something I do from 9 to 5. I don't ever have to think about it when I go home. To build a truly equitable, diverse, and inclusive environment where people want to stay, that doesn't work. It relies on your personal value structure, which will influence your day-to-day interactions. And so that's got to come into play. Since 2019, we were both kind of shocked at the number. We have trained over 2,000 participants in 20 different organizations, and they represent a variety of sectors. So we've hit corporate, we've hit faith, government, and education, and this has included 5 school districts, 2 police departments, and 2 municipalities. And at the bottom, you can just see some of the partners that we've worked with. I see one, of course, up front, Joe Lanis from Wisconsin Chamber Orchestra. Don't forget about Concerts on the Square this summer. Yeah, give it up for Concerts on the Square. Oh, and Paul Higginbotham right here. Okay, so this is all great, right? We did all these things, but how do we know we're getting to the place where we set out to get? How do we know we're mitigating the negative health effects of racial battle fatigue? How do we even know we're heading the right direction? Well, I mean, the answer is very simply evaluation, 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 a lot of it. And so you'll see in that little figure 8 here, it is this iterative process, coming up with an idea, strategizing, implementing the idea, saying, looking at it, how did it work? Did it work how we thought? If yes, let's make it better. If not, let's change it. And then going back through it, strategizing, implementing, evaluating. If you don't do that, you're not doing your best work. You just plain aren't. So figure out how you can work that into your process. And what this means is that evaluation isn't just looking at the end of a program. After we've done all the things in this grant, okay, let's look back and see what we did. I mean, that's important. We have to do that. But if we only do it at those periods, we're missing a big opportunity in between where we could be making a bigger impact. And so this means periodic check-ins. This means midpoint surveys. This might mean a 3-question survey after every event that you do, so you can see what's happening. This means counting your demographics. This means sitting down and having face-to-face conversations with people involved to get the real story about how it went and how it felt. And it's absolutely critical that you are doing continuous and dynamic evaluation, and that also you're looking at both quantitative and qualitative measures. We have a very big focus on the quantitative, on the numbers. How many people came? What's the breakdown in race? Where do they come from? What's the zip code? But that doesn't tell me if was this valuable to people. What brought up uncomfortable things in the session? Was this just a complete way? I already knew all of this, and you could actually start at session 5 instead of session 1. So we have to get that qualitative information to do a good job. And I can't say this enough. Most importantly, we have to admit when we're wrong. We have to admit when we got it wrong, because we get it wrong a lot. And there's absolutely nothing wrong with saying that. I thought it would work this way. All the information available to me indicated it would work this way. I tried it. It didn't work that way. Why not? Ask the question, figure it out, try again, and try again, and try again, and try again. That's one of the things that comes from my past life as a research scientist. My every day in doing biological scientific experiments in the chemistry lab, every day it did not work. Every single day it did not work. I'll have 12 different variables. I can change one of those at a time. All right, let's see what happens. Oh, didn't work again. Change it again. Oh, didn't work. Oh, but I learned something this time. Okay, change it again until I get it right. And that's how we learn things. That's how we make progress. And so really getting to that question of, are we improving social cohesion? And so I'm just going to share with you a couple of points about things that we've heard through our programs that let us know that we're on the right track. So this first quote here is from someone that participated in our grassroots leadership training, the Exploring Principles of Leadership, in one of our post-course surveys. And this person said this allowed them the opportunity to be noticed in the workshop and to be noticed in the events that they're doing and the things that they're doing in the community. So that feeling of recognition helped them to create one of the things that we said would help us know if we were improving social cohesion was this increased sense of ownership of a space and recognition that you matter in that space and recognition that you have capacity to make change and that you're doing good work is absolutely critical for feeling a sense of ownership. Doing programs, things like voting, right? That gives us a sense of ownership over political processes. It's small, sometimes it's frustrating, but it's something we can do. From our leadership participants, when this was being planned by Dr. G, Harry, Allie, others, Annette Miller, Inequity by Design was involved in the first few cohorts as well. The idea was this is going to help build leadership capacity. We were focused very much on how that individual would interact within their corporate setting. Would they be, able to make policy practice changes up front? And of course that happened. There's very powerful leadership training happening. But overwhelmingly on the survey, the statements were, thank God for this space, right? This is a space, it's all Black. White staff don't even go in the room. So Nehemiah staff, we might drop off the lunch, we're not there, right? We want to make sure it's sacred. And this is the thing that people called out. Oh, I can exhale. I see people that I can relate to. I'm now also meeting people that are peers and colleagues in the community who I maybe never crossed paths with before. And I didn't even know existed. And now I have a new network that I can build from. And so this person was saying, and this person actually was in the COVID cohort, which got interrupted and went on Zoom. But, going into a room where they weren't the only person of color felt really great and just felt like there were people who understood their lived experience. And can't underestimate the importance of that. And so, that's one of the increased support network, but also being in a space where you're experiencing fewer microaggressions. So not anyone has to do anything, but you're just free from that for a while is important. I think I missed one here. The other big takeaway is from our history class. And that's the active part of the reduced microaggressions. So we'll often get statements from people that really are realizing, why is this important? Who they're in a room where they're feeling very convicted. And the most important thing about this is that anyone can get information. We can take any number of classes. We can watch any number of YouTube videos, download facts and figures. But unless that impacts our heart and our mind, what are we going to do about it? Do we feel like it's our problem? Do we feel motivated to work? And so that's why a lot of our training at Nehemiah takes a very specific approach at combining both personal, relational stories and with that didactic, factual education information, so that you're figuring out, how do I personally connect to this problem, and what is my personal role in it? How do I feel? What do I do about it? And so that's what we hear a lot from people, was that just creating that awareness, which then opens up the opportunity to do things differently. So just to kind of wrap up here, I want to just talk a little bit about the biggest takeaways. So absolutely the biggest takeaway is that Black leadership has to be central, and it's absolutely essential for lasting impact. Again, like I said, if we haven't experienced an issue, we cannot define the problem. We can read all the books in the world. We can do our best to guess at it. But most of the time, we're not really going to get it right. Or we might have it almost right, but not all the way. And so we need that lived experience in the room. And, also remembering that, again, Black community is not, everyone says monolith. I mean, people are people. People think differently. People have different experiences, come from different walks of life. So in your look towards Black leadership, you got to make sure you're looking broadly. A lot of people will say, I know this person, so that's what I'm going by. That's my only view, and everyone must think that way. That's a mistake. Also, in your rooms, it's not enough just to have that one person that comes in. We got to make sure that we're looking broadly and that we're being open to suggestions. So being invited to those spaces, leaving room for those spaces to be created and executed are absolutely essential. And so this whole initiative has been driven by the Black community and really focused on uniting leadership, uniting vision, and uniting strategy to create systemic change while honoring lived experience and cultural insight. Big point. The second piece here is building social and partnership capital. That's the thing that catalyzes change. If we don't have people equipped with the knowledge and the tools to do the work, it's very difficult to make the change happen. So that word catalyze was very important and intentional when we were writing the Our Madison plan, because it's not about, again, us coming in and doing all the things. It's about creating something that will help move that thing along. So a catalyst is something that sits in a space, and its presence helps things to happen, gives energy, gives information. And so having that partnership built is so important. And programs like leadership training, volunteer mobilization, and cross-sector partnerships have successfully engaged thousands of people across counties and states in this work, strengthening the social networks, aligning the stakeholders, and all really in the name of systemic equity. We're really looking at this as a way to build relationships, enhance that social cohesion within this partnership. Now we fit together, we belong, and we can get work done. And then, of course, to expand access to power and resources. So this is another point. If you're in an organizational position where you have access to a space, you have access to money, how are you making that available? How are you using that resource as your contribution to what's happening? There's a difference between saying, I have a venue, I'm going to put on an event that you will like. Can you send me people to speak? No, that's not the way. The way is to say, I have a venue. I know you've been trying to do this work. Do you want to come use it? And then stepping back, saying, here's where the bathrooms are. Here's the security plan. Here's the resources like the mics and things, but you do what you need to do to make it happen, and being okay with that. And then also preparing yourself for people that might be doing business differently than what you would expect at your typical corporate function. You have to be okay with that. There are just a couple pictures here that represent some of this partnership capital. We have Harry speaking at Rotary a while back. We have Dr. G, who has been involved in the Community Justice Council from Dane County, looking at some criminal justice reform, along with Anthony Cooper, so partnering with government. And then, we always make sure that our events, food is a very big part of Nehemiah. If we have a meeting, there's probably going to be food at it. Likely bacon is very important. But in this case, we had Just Veggies cater. So making sure that we're partnering with those small organizations and building up where we have our resources, putting them in places where it's needed. And then finally, promoting equity must acknowledge and address racial trauma. We can't hide from this fact, and we can't ignore this fact. Since the root cause for health disparities, health inequities, the root cause for Black people having more heart disease, higher infant mortality, things like that, is literally racism. We owe it to ourselves and we owe it to our communities and our solutions to not be afraid of that, to not be afraid to acknowledge that, to speak it openly and honestly, just like we would, today's Friday. It's a fact. And so we have to continuously revisit this to make sure that we're minimizing the harm that exists, to make sure that we're not causing additional harm, but then also we're providing spaces for healing, that we're providing safe spaces. We're not feeling left out if we're not invited to that space. Doesn't mean we don't matter, just means we don't need to be there that day. And this approach integrates education and racial battle fatigue, social determinants of health, and emotional intelligence, which fosters healing. So in addition to all of the facts and figures that we get, how are we understanding this? Are we empathizing with people with that different lived experience? And just matter of having that awareness helps to build in some of that healing and the lasting impact. This work confronts racial discrimination and its health impacts. And it really is essential for looking towards long-term structural and systemic equity. And so what I'll leave you with is this question. Have you moved from informed to transformed? So maybe you've taken all the classes, you've read all the books, you're very, very informed. Harry always tells a story about a person talking about working in the space of home housing insecure people and wondering what they can do. And they listed a bunch of books and said, what can I read next? And Harry said, I think you read enough books. You got like a master's degree at this point. So maybe it's time to engage in a relationship. If you feel like you've moved from informed to transformed, how did you get there? How can you help share your story, your methods, what worked and what didn't work with other people? These are things that we need to be talking about, yes, at Thanksgiving, yes, at other holidays, yes, in our workplaces, in our break rooms, at our lunchtimes. Be that person. Be that person that brings it up. Be that person that calls it the joke. Be that person that corrects the narrative on, whatever headline is in the news today. If you know better, do better, and make sure everyone around you knows better. So tell them how you got there. And if you haven't yet moved from informed to transform, maybe you're not sure how to get there, what I want you to think about as you go through the rest of the day and the breakout sessions, and most importantly, during lunch and the breaks, as you talk to people, as you build relationships, and you prepare to leave this space, how will you get there? How will you get from informed to transformed? And that's all I have for you. Thank you for coming.